You ever wake up and realize everything you believed was a lie perpetrated by Russians? Huh? Ever wake up and find out your favorite news outlet and podcaster are actually paid Russian informants? Has that ever happened? Tens of millions of people are doing that this morning. Probably feel really stupid. The Department of Justice in the United States dropped a major filing suggesting that Russian disinformation, factually, with 4,000 pages of evidence, was at the heart of everything that Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern, at the heart of disinformation in North America. And a major Canadian connection. Lauren Chen, Liam Donovan, Canadian company named Roaming Millenial, the parent company, they were the people that did the business with the Russians, knowingly doing it, knowingly evading sanctions, knowingly committing crimes against the country of origin that they worked in, Canada and the United States. Today, we're going to talk to Marcus Kolga, senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's an expert on Kremlin and Russia disinformation and a cyber guy. Yeah, that's right. He tracks this stuff and has been for a long time. Marcus recently back from the eastern part of the world where he tries to gather information and stick up for democratic principles and purposes and values. That's what Marcus does. He's joined us a couple of times, and he joins us today at Kolga, is where you can find him on Twitter, to break down the very latest in what is increasingly looking like a Canadian disinformation outlet doing terrible business in Russia, brainwashing millions of people around the world with what we always knew to be pure, unadulterated bullshit. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Dean Blundell. Everything we do, you can find us at Crier Media, YouTube, Crier Media, and download the podcast anywhere you get your fine podcasts. Without further ado, more on the Russian disinformation bombshell. Here's my friend, Marcus Kolga. You know, it's weird because when the DOJ dropped the charges on Russia and Tenet and started to do a little due diligence and realized there was a serious Canadian connection through Roaming Millenial, Lauren Chen, Liam Donovan. And then you looked at some of the talking points that Russia demands for their money, right? It is every single maple MAGA, non-democratic leader. And I'm pointing at Pierre Poilievre with my little finger and big finger. But it is every conservative talking point wrapped up in Russian paid propaganda. It's wild.
Yeah, well, what are the objectives, or what are rather Vladimir Putin's objectives when it comes to disinformation? I mean, they've been the same for the past 10 years. And there's like two sides to it, right? Right now, over the past 2.5 years, or actually really since 2014, the focus has been, it's anti-Ukrainian. These narratives are intended to erode Western public support for Western aid to Ukraine, whether it's weapons or funding. So anything like that. It's also anti-NATO, anti-American. So we're seeing a lot of that. But on the other side, these operations, and this is going back decades. I mean, this is even Cold War strategy for the Russians, is to divide and polarize Western societies. They don't give a hoot about ideology. Yeah. All they do is they look for the most polarizing issues, the most polarizing narratives, and they exploit them. And so what we're seeing from this platform, especially on the Canadian side of things, is that basically everything in Canada is shit. Our economy is terrible. There's a housing crisis that the government is responsible for.
There's a gay army that's coming to get everybody.
It's all due to the trans army, the LGBTQ army that's going to get us. They're marching lockstep with the immigrants who are trying to overtake us. And I was sort of watching some of the videos that are being produced by the influencers that work for this platform. I mean, there's an entire video dedicated to blaming Indian immigrants on basically transforming Tim Hortons into something that that it wasn't, that it no longer is, and like these videos, nostalgic videos from the 1970s and 80s about people buying coffee, using that to say that it's all these Indian immigrants who have turned it into something else, and so all of that,
highly anti-immigrant. Like that's one of those things, Marcus, that really came out. We'll get to some of the points and we'll go over some of the short strokes in the overview. I can tell you're verklempt. You and I talked a couple nights ago. You're on a flight back from Europe, and I'm like, "What do you make of this shit?" And you're like, "Oh my god, it's like everything. This is right in my wheelhouse." Being a disinformation guy, cybersecurity guy, Russian expert. Let's just get to some of the short strokes because this is huge, right? Russian disinformation was exposed by the DOJ, uncovering a $10 million scheme involving Tenet Media, major Canadian connection. And the details are as follows. Key players, 2 RT employees, a couple of ladies, I believe, been indicted for orchestrating the scheme directly from Putin's friends. Pro-Russian content to U.S. and Canadian audience. The operation involved the Tennessee-based company known as Tenet Media. 2,000 videos, dude, 2,000 videos in 2 years. Across social media platforms, content reaching approximately 16 million views on YouTube alone. 1.2 billion is the number in the last 6 months. Communicating directives with Putin's inner circle to destabilize, to your point, Canada and the U.S. Tenet Media and associated influencers at Tenet Media described the network of heterodox commentators. This is the company that Russia paid to set up. This is their company. This is a Russian media company made to look like an American media company, North American media company, focusing on Western political, cultural issues, been linked to several prominent right-wing influence. Who are they? Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Taylor Hansen, Matt Christensen. Let's have a look at their website, which has now been taken over by the U.S. government. Lauren Southern, we're going to talk about her in the Canadian connection today. But these are the people. These are the folks that have been paid tens of millions of dollars by Russia to spread disinformation friendly to all of these talking points. To your point, what are the talking points, Marcus? Because these are the campaign tools and the target audience. They're right on the screen. If you're following or watching, listening on Apple, iTunes, et cetera, and you're not seeing this on YouTube, you can follow us there, Crier Media YouTube. You can clearly see these are directly from the DOJ's papers. Can we go through this real quick and then we'll get to your thoughts? Because a lot of people are waking up over the last couple of days going, oh my God, I got had.
I hope so.
So this is, let's go through this real quick. These are the campaign topics Russia has been telling their paid propagandists at Tenet, and around 2,800 of them around the world, by the way. These are only 60 that they found in the United States. 600. Encroaching universal poverty. We see it all the time. Record inflation, to your point, halting of economic growth, unaffordable prices, food essential goods, risk of job loss for white Americans or white Canadians, privileges for people of color, perverts and the disabled, constant lies of the administration about the situation in the country. We see it here. This is so fucking old school. Threat of crime coming from people of color and immigrants. Oh my God. Overspending on foreign policy, Ukraine, not in the best interest of U.S. citizens or Canadians. Constant lies to the voters by the party in power. Last but not least, America/Canada suffering a defeat. Despite your candidate's efforts, we are being drawn into some wars. Our guys are all going to die in Ukraine. There's going to be a third world war. And the target audience are conservative voters, conservative supporters of traditional family values, white Americans, white Canadians representing the lower middle class. I just want to let you vamp. Isn't it all there?
It's all there. These are exactly the narratives that we've seen the Kremlin promoting now, actively promoting since 2014. These are all narratives, again, that are intended to undermine our democracy. It's intended to undermine our trust in each other, and it's intended to break down the cohesion of our society. It's meant to tear us apart. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that domestically, right? These sorts of narratives, they tap into these emotions that have only been growing since COVID, really. And Russia did, even back then, job of identifying narratives as a gateway into this sector of society. And they've been doing that ever since, and just continuing to pour gas. And so the successes that they saw already, going back to 2016, to the U.S. elections then, the successes that they saw then, I mean, they've just been working on them and continuing to develop them. And, $10 million, it may not be a huge amount of money in terms of Russia's overall information operations, which amount to about $3 billion or so. It's not a huge amount in terms of that, but in terms of our operations to counter Russian disinformation and such, it is a huge sum of money. And so that really underscores how effective they are, and the importance to the Putin regime.
Can you break down some of the key elements of the Russian disinformation operation the DOJ uncovered, and kind of what stood out to you the most? Maybe it's a Canadian angle, I don't know, but as a Russia, Kremlin, cybersecurity expert, talk to me about the things that you're like, wow.
Yeah, so none of this really surprised me, because we've been tracking Kremlin-aligned influencers in Canada, in North America, worldwide now for the past decade or so. And there are actually a lot of Canadians who have collaborated with RT, writing opinion pieces, appearing on RT shows. Also, I don't want to name too many names, but there's a prominent Canadian university professor who was a star RT columnist up until February of 2022. He wrote nearly weekly columns that were heavily promoted by RT. I mean, that's a clear case of collaboration. Now, whether this person received any sort of compensation for that work, that we don't know. But this is something that along with the Canadian involvement in this, it's something that the Canadian government needs to be investigating.
Yeah, you said that yesterday, and you've been really vocal about it on Twitter. Just one of these tweets that you put up with a story from the Globe about Quebec right-wing influencers being the key to Russian disinformation. This is, of course, Lauren Chen, Liam Donovan from Roaming Millenial Inc., who have that straight pipe to Russia and set up Tenet. They own it. Anyone who's regularly consumed far right left media since 2014 has to ask themselves if their political views are independent or they've been exploited and hijacked by the Kremlin. And these Canadian con men, that you speak of, Lauren Southern comes to mind. She is front and center on Tenet's website. You and I have shared a couple pieces of information. You're laughing already. In 2018, interesting how, you're starting to see some of these receipts show up. She went and met with this gentleman. I want you to kind of go through this picture. She said she was making a video about Russia and how good Russia actually is. And she met with a gentleman named Dugan. And this is her tweet. Hope y'all are ready for this Russia series. Tell me about this.
Right. It's standing with Alexander Dugan. Alexander Dugan is a far-right neo-fascist who has advocated for a Russian empire that spans the Pacific all the way to Dublin. In fact, he's called for the banning of technology and a return to basically the Stone Age. I mean, this is the philosophy that is behind Vladimir Putin's current invasion in Ukraine. It is hate-based. It is anti-Western. And in many cases, Dugan and his followers, they've also promoted and published anti-Semitic narratives. And so this is who this Canadian is connecting with. Apparently had an interview with him. This is what she claimed on Twitter. Although I haven't been able to find that interview, the video of this interview or the podcast yet. But the fact that she's in Russia in 2018 after the invasion of Crimea and meeting with this fella, it's telling. Because this guy is really driving the policy right now in terms of the war and the thinking and a lot of that propaganda that's being used to brainwash Russians.
How does it fit into that broader picture of Russian influence efforts targeting, Western influencers? Because she went there willingly, right? But there are people like Lauren, several other influencers you and I are probably both aware of, probably more than I'm aware of because this is something you track. What do you make of their effort to get in touch with Canadian influencers, North American influencers? And what do you make of the scheme that they were able to kind of do an end around, setting up their own media company in the United States through Canada, which, by the way, question about RICO laws here in Canada. I mean, like, this is just something going on here.
Yeah, so we need to actually look at that aspect. This is, as media is reporting this as a U.S. influence operation, it's really a Canadian one.
Yeah.
These are Canadians who are at the core of it, and the fact that we have not investigated these individuals, that we're not considering charges against them, is actually, that is probably one of the most shocking aspects of all of this. But going back to your initial question, Russia's been doing this stuff for decades already. They were already engaging in influence operations, trying to capture journalists, elected officials, academics, back in the 1930s. And we know this because there was a guy named Igor Guzenko, who was a GRU, a Russian intelligence agent working in the Russian embassy in Ottawa. And, having come to Ottawa, he spent about a year here. He had a young family, and he looked at what we had here in Canada and said, I don't want to go back to the Soviet Union. I want to raise my family in Canada. And so the way he thought that he could is by walking out of the Soviet embassy with a trove of sensitive documents identifying Canadian assets, Soviet Canadian assets. And he walked out and gave these documents to the Canadian government. 25 people ended up being arrested. And among them were, like I said, journalists, elected officials, and academics who were engaging in these sorts of operations. And in interviews after the fact, Guzenko was asked, what's the objective? What are Russia's objectives in terms of intelligence operations and gathering of assets in Canada? And this is back in the 1950s. He said that it's influencing public policy, influencing public opinion. So these guys have been going at this for, and they've really managed to perfect those operations to a certain degree. It's a template that works, and that's exactly what they've been doing here. And so we know that the Kremlin has been working with. Again, we don't know if any of these individuals have received any benefit, but there are clearly Canadian academics who help amplify and launder Kremlin narratives, and have been doing this in our national media, on various other far right and far left platforms, and mostly far left and far left platforms for the past 2.5 years. They don't appear that much on mainstream media anymore. So academics are, that do that. Journalists, there might be, who ideologically align with authoritarians for whatever reason, or with Putin, who might contribute to amplifying some of those narratives. Some of them may do it out of some other form of benefit. It may be ego and getting a scoop on a story. We saw that with the attack against Chrystia Freeland back in 2017-18, where Russian propagandists essentially accused her of being a Nazi whitewasher. And so we saw that back then. And we see a lot of this sort of alignment with, and the attempted capture of influencers in Canada. And so it has been a huge problem. We've failed to acknowledge it. But it's happening. Our European allies are acknowledging it. They're engaging in action to try and disrupt those operations. But we're not doing it here. And until we start doing what we saw the U.S. do yesterday with this indictment, Canada is going to remain a hotspot for this activity, and Canadians themselves will remain vulnerable to these operations.
Yeah, I'm glad you're leaning into the Canadian portion. Going back and giving a little context.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's massive. I believe you're right. I believe this is a Canadian operation. Yeah, sure. Ollie put out a tweet. Blaze Media fired Lauren Chen, her and her husband, Liam Donovan. The centerpieces through Roaming Millenial, which is a Canadian company. They set it up here for that reason. Yesterday, DOJ indictment alleged that her and her husband set it all up, knew they were talking to Russians. Tim Pool. And by the way, I mean, she's not just a contributor to her own organization. Lauren is a contributor to RT, to your point. Social commentator, began as a YouTuber, since gained millions of views on platforms and hundreds of thousands of followers. She's also appeared on Fox, Blaze TV, RT, OANN, Newsmax, The Daily Wire, and Rebel News. Let's go down that road a little bit. The Canadian connection. Why don't we have a foreign registry here in this country?
We do. We passed the legislation C-70. It passed in the spring before Parliament broke, or took the break for the summer. But we do have the foreign influence transparency registry. That was enacted in the spring, and so it's there. There's still, I mean, we're in this sort of like a gray zone where they are still trying to figure out the regulations to enact it, but it's there. It's there. The other thing that we have is our sanctions legislation, SEMA and the Magnitsky Act. RT has been on our sanctions list since June of 2022. Now, according to this indictment, the individuals that were running this organization had been producing content directly for RT at least as early as October 2021, but also that $10 million that was paid out during that period when RT was directly under Canadian sanctions. Now, it was, of course, that U.S. entity that was paid $10 million. But apparently, again, according to this indictment, the two individuals received over between $700,000 and $800,000 themselves. Much of that funding, according to the indictment, again, went into their Canadian bank account. If that happened, these individuals should be in real trouble in terms of breaking our sanctions laws.
Well, that's an interesting wrinkle, isn't it? And it goes back to, just prior to the convoy, if I'm doing my math properly, if I'm doing my calendar math properly. And by the way, Lauren Chen, Liam Donovan, Roaming Millenial, their name has come up several times in the promotion and the sustainability of the hate messaging and the bullshit that we saw in Ottawa during that faux convoy, during that, the attempted, I call it the attempted Canadian insurrection, where we had a bunch of people show up and all the money and all the messaging seems to be somehow connected to some of the same people, right? There is so much here in terms of Russian disinformation and sowing discord that you can connect to not only the convoy, not only to Tenet, not only to Lauren Chen, not only to Russia, not only to J6, but to the idea that every single talking point in the DOJ's dissemination of what Russia tries to do, that this is not just a U.S. problem. This is not something that just came out of Canada, that this has been a concerted effort for a long time to brainwash a certain segment of North America into taking up arms against their own country in some capacity.
Yeah, Dean. So one of the things that I've been a little bit annoyed with over the past 24 hours is how some media outlets are framing this as being just a Russian information operation targeting the United States. It's not. No. Those information operations know no borders. So when Russia, and this is literally the Russian government introducing these narratives on this platform, targeting, the consumers of information from Tenet Media, they're not saying, "Oh, we're going to target the U.S. today." They're targeting everyone that is watching, and there is no border to that information. So it gives us a false sense of security to identify this as being just a Russian information operation.
Yeah, sure.
It's Canadian as well, and this is one very important aspect to all of this that I think that we're missing.
Do you have any projections? Because Canada, Dominic LeBlanc said something yesterday I thought was pretty strong. I'll put it on the screen here. You can follow us at YouTube, Crier Media. We stand united with the U.S. on confronting Russia's aggression against democratic societies. Any Canadian aiding Russia to spread disinformation, criminal and covert activities, and corruption to undermine our sovereignty will face the full force of Canadian law. Your thoughts, Mr. Kolga?
Yeah, well, I hope he follows through. I hope it's not just an empty statement to try and sort of tick off a box. I mean, the Canadian government needs to be doing something about this. Dominic LeBlanc has to be ordering the RCMP, CSIS, and our intelligence community to start looking into all of those individuals who have been collaborating with Russian state media. Again, we're looking at RT, but there are these think tanks as well. Valdai Club, which is Vladimir Putin's personal think tank. There are Canadians on the advisory board of that. There's the Russian International Affairs Council. There are Canadian academics and political activists who have been publishing with that organization. So it's not just RT; it's all of these information operations. Minister LeBlanc needs to order our law enforcement and intelligence communities to look into those activities, that collaboration that's happening. Minister Varani needs to be ordering an investigation directly related to this indictment, the Canadians who have been involved here, because, like I said, it appears, at least according to the indictment, that Canadian sanctions laws have been violated. And so, the most important reason why we need to be doing this is to demonstrate that the Canadian government will hold those individuals to account who are collaborating with foreign authoritarian regimes. That's what we need to do. Because right now, if we don't do that, we're sending them a green light that this sort of activity is perfectly normal. It normalizes it. It's okay. It's open season. Anything goes here in Canada. That's the most important reason why we need to start an investigation and hold these individuals to account.
Oh, man, it's so nice to hear you say that. And I said that yesterday in a tweet when Mr. LeBlanc tweeted. I'm like, hopefully with teeth this time, fella, because we've seen them just kind of bypass criminal responsibility for the past 3-4 years when it comes to any of this stuff. I can't help but wondering if it's one of them October surprises or the last year of an election. But we've seen major Russian disinformation support only one party. We've seen major Russian disinformation support only one ideology in that messaging. And I got to ask you this question before I let you go. We've got a couple minutes left. And I know you're busy, Marcus, trying to save the world, and I appreciate it. But I can't help but get away from, and I mentioned it at the start, and this is kind of where I want to wrap up. Pierre Poilievre about a year ago pulled support for Ukraine, which is top of the fucking list when it comes to Russian disinformation. How to get people in different countries, provinces, politicians, influencers to fight back against the idea that saving the people of Ukraine from a dictatorial, genocidal asshole like Putin is a good idea. We've seen the Conservative Party of Canada hold up a whole bunch of those misinformation and disinformation mantras and goals by the Russian entities at play here in the DOJ filings, being used as slogans, being used like gender ideology, talking about parental rights, talking about how immigrants are going to come to Canada and take all the white jobs. It is note for note that I see in a Poilievre rally speech. Is that why none of them are saying anything today about this Russian disinformation stuff? And do you have questions in your mind about, how far-reaching some of these relationships have become in our own industry of politics in this country?
Look, I think that the Conservatives in Canada need to be reminded that Russian information operations were targeting their party in 2015 ahead of that election. They were aggressively attacking the Harper government then because of its strong positions on Ukraine. And you better believe that if in the next election the Conservatives come to power, they will then become the targets again of the Kremlin, because I don't think that they can turn back the clock. And I don't think there's any real interest, to be quite honest, of turning back the clock on the current government's policies when it comes to Ukraine. But what I will say is that it is extremely urgent that these conservatives, the Pierre Poilievre and his team, come out and state that they do not support these sorts of activities, that these sorts of actors need to be held to account. It's Canadian democracy that we're talking about. This is beyond any partisan politics. Our society and democracy depend on every single political party being on the same page with this and standing up and rejecting efforts by foreign authoritarians to pollute and distort our information environment. This is key. So I would urge those conservatives, the Conservative Party, to stand up immediately against this.
Is it telling to you a little bit that they haven't? Not a word, nothing. I know you got to be careful.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure that they're absorbing this information, and I'm sure that they're. I've seen some photos on Twitter that would reflect rather poorly on some people. But the other thing that I would say is the last thing that I would say is that these Russian information operations are agnostic of any ideology. They don't care. All they want to do is divide us and polarize us. And like I said, break down the cohesion within our society. And conservatives need to recognize this. And they really take about some of the informed and how that may have formed their current views on domestic Canadian policy, but also international policy.
Think we'll see some people get rounded up legally in the next little bit?
Well, again, if what's being alleged in the indictment is true, then it has to happen. Otherwise, if we don't hold some of these people to account, it's going to be the Wild West in Canada.
You know what Tim Pool was kind enough. Tim Pool and Laura Loomer, just to play a little video before I let you go, were kind enough to talk about what they think people who commit treason for money, what they think should happen to them. I'm going to play this for you and then I'll let you take your leave. Let's watch it together, shall we?
We were talking about crime and punishment, and Donald Trump needs to go after these people. Laura was saying, take the gloves off, stop being nice to them, fuck them. And I said, they should all be arrested. There should be lists. Laura said, we should give anyone who committed treason the death penalty, and then the show gone. Because YouTube doesn't allow calls for the death penalty. That's why they deleted our episode of Alex Jones the first time it happened 3 years ago. And he didn't even say anything crazy. He said, I agree with Bill Gates. We should have firing squads.
Hey, oops. How about that one? How about that when you get caught committing treason and like
how much did he get paid?
$100,000 an episode, 4 episodes a month, $400,000 a month. You know how
do I get into this racket? That's crazy.
Dude, and here's the thing, and I'll end with this. I don't think people understand. We've been approached several times to deliver information that is against Canada's values, that is against democracy. We've been asked several times to do that by people. And it was always the same thing. Hey, I know a guy in this country. They really need to get some messaging out. Are you interested? The answer's always been no. And let me just say this, as someone who has a little expertise when it comes to podcasting, broadcasting, content, when it comes to getting a message out in a big, bad way. If somebody in Turkey called me, which is what happened to Tim, through an intermediary that I knew from another country, which is what happened to Tim, and said, I'm going to give you $100,000 an episode. I'm Russian, but I live in Turkey. I have to tell you, you cannot feign ignorance at that point. You know this business is not full of those people. And if you get that phone call for that amount of money is untoward. It is espionage. It is pure propaganda. It is fucking illegal. It is treason. Each one of those individuals, Mr. Rubin, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Poole, had to have some idea that the content that they were putting out on behalf of a Russian financier in Turkey that got shoveled into a bank account in Canada, that got sent to Tenet in the United States of America, they had to know. They had to know. And I can tell you why they had to know, because those opportunities do not exist. And if they exist, they come from very bad people with very bad intentions. That much I know today, Mr. Kolga, for a fact.
Yes. And last point from me is that Canadians should be outraged by this. because this is the Canadian connection is very clear. And I would say that for all of your listeners, like send a tweet to your local MP, send a tweet to this government demanding that they investigate it and put a stop to it and hold these individuals to account.
God bless you. Thanks, Marcus. Really appreciate it. Marcus Kolga, McDonald Laurier Institute. You can get him at Kolga on Twitter. He fights the good fight for democracy. Welcome back to Canada. Really great to see your smiling face again, brother. Hopefully we do this again. Thanks so much for your time.
Anytime, Dean.
Talk to you soon. Marcus Kolga, ladies and gentlemen. A little 411 on what's going on with Russian disinformation. Yeah, it's, I said this yesterday in a tweet. How incredible it must be to be one of those rubes, thinking about Jamie Salé and Theo Fleury and Ron Clark and all those people that bought it, that just ate the shit, ate the Russian shit, and knew it was antithetical to Canadian values and democracy. But because of their core beliefs, which is what Russia does a great job of, connecting their outrage to your core beliefs, they ate the shit. No critical thought, all emotion, and people like Lauren Southern should be in fucking jail. People like Lauren Chen should be in jail. Liam Donovan should be in jail. Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, jail. Do you know why? Because they took a bunch of money to fuck you over. If you're one of those people that ate the shit and you're waking up this morning angry, like Nick Fuentes the other day, that Nazi right-wing loser, who's like, Donald Trump finally admitted he lost the election. Why did we march on the Capitol if he lost the election? He lied to it. It's all a lie. The anti-DEI shit, Russian. All of it's a lie. The gender shit, the abortion shit, all of it comes from Russia. It gets delivered to certain religious assholes or right-wing think tanks or right-wing podcasters or right-wing influencers, and they get paid millions to do it. Happens here in Canada too. Where you have Canadian, and I mean, not just happens here. It looks like it comes out of this country because we don't have RICO laws. We just started a transparent foreign agent registry, just according to Marcus. Just. Legit, 2024. These guys have been hammering away for years. And I'll tell you something else. If there is a media company, podcaster, influencer who tries to tell you what your ideology should be and what you should support, that's propaganda too. You know it. You know it is. I know it is. I can see it coming from fucking a mile away. Y'all should be able to see the same shit. Anything hateful, anything about the marginalized, anything anti-LGBTQ, anything that represents hatred as a solution. You see it a lot from Christian bot accounts who aren't Christians. They're just bots. 80% of traffic that you see that peddles in hate or conspiracy theories, hatred of democracy, 80 to 85% of them are inauthentic. They're not real. They're fake. I've been ringing this bell for a long fucking time. And they belong to Russia. They belong to China. They belong to India. And who do they support? Conservative interests. All of them. Why? Because they know that they are the dumbest supporters of any political institution at all. And they know Pierre Poilievre is compromised. They know. And so they support him with all their messaging. They boost his messaging. I can't speak to the internal relationships between Pierre Poilievre's friends, third-party agencies, and other people at the moment. I can, but I won't. They're bad people here to fuck you over in support of and in concert with the Russian government, the Chinese government. Yeah. Believe that, as they say. And write your MP and tell him you want something done about Roaming Millenial, Lauren Chen, Liam Donovan, who, by the way, work very heavily with the post-millennial here in this country of Canada. Go and have a look at it. I emailed them the other day and I said, hey, do you guys work with these guys? Nada, nothing. They haven't responded. Put out a tweet to that effect as well. You can go see it on my Twitter at it's Dean Blundell. Nothing you see is real. And we were right about everything. It is legitimately Russia, Russia, Russia. Hi, PP. Hi. Have a great day. Thanks for being part of the show. Really appreciate it. Don't forget, you can get everything we do at Crier Media YouTube, our podcasts and audio version, Spotify, and of course, Apple. Would love for you to download, rate, review if you enjoyed this podcast. We're going to try and educate you and keep up with this and kind of pull these apart from the actual podcasts that we do about people navigating life. The Dean Blundell Show is available anywhere you get your podcast, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, etc. And thanks to our friend Marcus Kolga for making some time for us. Everything we do can be found at Crier Media, including a complete breakdown of the DOJ charges. And we're going to continue to stay on this story for Canada. Canada needs better angels. Huh? Who'd have thought it'd be me? Anyway, have a great day. Really appreciate you stopping by. Don't forget to follow us, Crier Media, at it's Dean Blundell, wherever you can find us. Look out for each other, will you? Bye now.